Hello and welcome to our look at the new IC-7300 Mark II. What we're going to do is tell you about the differences between the Mark I and the Mark II, and also got some very useful tips for you, because there are some things relating to those differences in terms of setting it up with a PC for digital or for rig control, where you're going to need to have some of the useful information we have in this video. So let's have a look at them side by side then, and when you look at the front panels, they look like twins, to be honest. They're absolutely identical, except if we do a spot the difference competition, the power switch on the Mark II is this lovely shade of blue, whereas on the original it's green. So that's the first difference. Second difference is actually the displays. So the Mark I had a TFT display, which is a thin film transistor display, whereas for the Mark II, Icom have gone with an IPS display, which is an in-plane switching display. And the reason Icom have chosen that is because the color depth is better, and also viewing angle wise it's better. You get better contrast anyway, but also from whichever angle you look at it from, you get the same color depth and you get the same brightness. But the next differences we're going to talk about are actually inside the box. The point about the Mark II version is it's evolution, not revolution. When you've got a radio that's sold so many and is so good, you're not going to want to throw anything away. You want to see how you can enhance it. And the enhancements that Icom have come up with are in response to customer feedback. So let's talk about the original first of all. For anybody who hasn't owned one of these yet or has not played with one, let me just recap why it has sold so many and why it's so popular. Now, this is a direct sampling SDR receiver. It covers all of the HF bands, it covers 60 meters, it covers 50 megs, and in the UK version 70 megs as well. It does all the modes you're going to want, so it's absolutely everything, including RTTY, and it also has a built-in RTTY decoder. It also has DSP, and the digital signal processing covers everything from the notch filters, the AGC, the equalizer on transmit, all the noise reduction. So it's a very versatile and very popular transceiver with many aficionados around the world. The performance on receive and transmit in the original is very good, but that's the first place that Icom have gone to make some improvements. So in the Mark II, the first thing we're going to notice is an improvement in the receiver. Now, as I said, the old one was great anyway, but improvements are always welcome. So the RMDR has been improved, and I hear you going, the what? Well, that's the reciprocal mixing dynamic range. And it's all to do with the fact that you get phase noise from the local oscillator. And then when you get strong adjacent signals, that can cause the whole noise floor of the receiver to come up. And this is one of those where the higher the figure, the better. So on the Mark I, it was 97 dB. It's now 105 dB on the Mark II. The other improvement is on the transmit phase noise, and you do get sort of random fluctuations in the phase in the local oscillator, and that'll affect your transmit signal in the sense that the energy then gets spread out into the adjacent channels, and so it's about spectral purity really. One of those figures that if it goes down it's better, so there's a 12 dB improvement and it's now 139 dB. So that's great. Improvements on TX, improvements on RX, but that's all inside the box. But the next differences we're going to see between the two are all on the back panel. When we were looking at the Mark I and the Mark II next to each other, I said they looked like twins and they were pretty much identical. But when you turn them round and look at the back panel, that's where you really begin to see the differences. So let's have a look. Well, this, of course, we would expect on both. This is our PL259 antenna connection. There's an earth connection and there's the power supply connection. Now, this is a really good addition. This is the Ethernet connector, and that means we can now plug this directly into our router. And so first advantage of that is it automatically picks up the time. Actually, it contacts a time server, so your time and date is always accurate and always automatically updated on the radio. But the other big thing is that now you don't need an external computer if you're going to remote control it. And that was quite a big deal with the IC-7300. When you're using the remote software, you had to have an external computer always running in order to do that. No more, because you're plugged directly into your router and the server lives inside the radio and you just contact it directly. More on that anon. You might have noticed that when I was talking before, on the big monitor behind us, you could see a big version of what was on the screen on the radio. That's because of the addition of this fellow, the HDMI connector, so you can now connect an external monitor. I think that looks great in the shack, but also it's a good addition if maybe you're going to take your club station out, or an exhibition station, or a special event station, and anyone who comes to visit will be able to see in big size what's happening on the radio screen. Here we've got a USB-C connector. Now this is another big change, and that means you now get two virtual COM ports, but it does mean, as we'll address later, you need a different USB driver to the IC-7300 Mark I, and that did catch me out. We've got the standard Icom accessory socket, we've got the extension speaker socket here, and this is the CIV remote. So if you're using an Icom linear, then the CIV controls from here can change the band on your linear and what have you through that socket. Here we've got the key socket. This is the send, that's the PTT for your linear, and that's the ALC for an external linear. And this is for connecting the external Icom tuner. The big one for me, when I looked on the back and thought, what the heck are they, was these two, because you've got two SMA connectors on the rear of the Mark II. What are they for? Well, this is very interesting because this is the implementation of an RX only antenna. So you can have a receive antenna plugged in here, and you can select it on the front panel. So you can either be receiving off this one or this one, and you could switch between them for transmit and receive if you wanted to. And some people like to do that, have separate receive and transmit antennas. So that's a great facility. You could also, on the out, you can connect an external receiver, maybe an external SDR, and then you can switch that on the front panel, and you'd be switching your main PL259 transmit receive antenna either to the IC-7300's receiver or to your external SDR. And so you could utilize this aerial with your other receiver, and there's no risk you're going to transmit into it and kill it. And the other thing you could do is you could put a filter, an external bandpass filter. So maybe if you're going to, I don't know, run a competition station and you're going to have other stations near you operating high power and you want extra filtering, then you can put an external bandpass filter between the in and out. Now, in what I was just describing with the antennas, connecting an external antenna or an SDR, as I'll show you in a second, it's all either or, but there is a workaround so that you can use them together. We've now turned the radio round the right way, plugged it all back in, so let's power it up and show you a few more of the differences between the Mark II and the Mark I. Now, I'm not going to go through all the menus again and show you how you drive this particular radio, because we have covered that off before. If you look at some of our previous videos, you can see the other Icom radios, including the original 7300, and how that menu system works and how you find your way around it. Basically, you've got your touch screen, you press menu and all your various options come up here, or you've got the function screen and some of the instant on-off functions are there, and you just do all that through the touch screen. So don't need to go through all of that, although I will just show you one thing, and that is because we're connected now via the Ethernet connector to the internet. I told you that it picks up the time automatically. So when you first get your radio out of the box, you want to just make sure that it's set up to do that. So you go into the menu, into set, and just go to time set, and it's all just lovely touch menu. UTC offset, well, as it's chilly old winter time in England at the moment, we don't need to do anything with that. Press date time, NTP time sync. We just make sure the NTP function is on, which it is, so that's fine. We're constantly updating our time. So let's talk some more about those two SMA connectors on the back, the RX in and the RX out, and show you how that works. Now, what you could do is you could have an external receive antenna plugged in to the RX in on there, and then we go into function and the second page of the function buttons here, and you've got RX ant off or on. So if we switch that on, we would now be receiving on this radio via the other receive antenna that we plugged in, and we would go back and it would all be working fine. We'd be on that antenna, and then if we wanted to transmit on the other antenna, you would have to go back in and switch it off again. Something else you could do is you could connect an external receiver, maybe an SDR, to the RX out SMA, and then you could switch the antenna between the PL259 or the SDR receiver. So you can see what's going on here. On my monitor, I've got SDR Console here, which is a brilliant SDR program by Simon, G4ELI, who lives here in Cornwall. And by the way, if you do download this, and use it, make a donation to him because he's put so much work into this. It's absolutely brilliant. It's not doing anything at the moment because it doesn't have an antenna connected to it, because the PL259 antenna is at the moment routing to the receiver on the IC-7300 Mark II. So if we go back into this function here and I switch that on, what you can now see is the SDR has sprung to life, but the downside is we now have nothing on the receiver on the IC-7300. So it's either or, which is a bit of a nuisance really, because what I'd really like to do is have the SDR and the IC-7300 Mark II sharing the same antenna. Well, there is a solution. What we can do is get one of these fellas. That way we can bridge the two SMA connectors and we can take a tap off for the SDR receiver. So that's what I'm going to wire up now. There we go, that's our three-way connector in. So we're using PL259 pigtails and adapters. So we've bridged between the two SMA connectors and we've also got a connection to the SDR receiver. So now we can see signals coming in on 20 meters that the receiver is displaying quite happily that are coming in via the PL259. And if we go back to this menu setting in function and hit RX and on, boom, our SDR has now sprung to life. And the good news is that the IC-7300 is also still able to use that antenna. So that's great because we're now sharing the antennas and we can go anywhere we like with our SDR. We could be listening on a different band perhaps, and we're quite safe that we're not going to accidentally transmit up it by sharing the antenna. But there's something else that we can do as well, because Simon's SDR console integrates nicely with another piece of software called Omnirig, which allows you to control your radio and sync it up with the SDR. So that means if you look, we're displaying the same frequency and I can now click and pounce. So if I turn the volume up, I can pick a signal. There's some FT8 going on here. So if I click on that, there we are. We can see it on the SDR. We can also hear it on the SDR if we wanted to, but I'm listening on the main IC-7300. So we now have given ourselves a good click and pounce system, and we could change bands. So if we went off, say, to 40 meters, and that will all display there for us, and we've got signals on 40. It's not awfully busy at the moment, but I know why that is. That is because you have to do that function switch band by band. So we go back there, you see we've changed band and it's now off, so we've got to switch it on again, and then the SDR springs back to life. So again, we're now on 40 meters. There it is then, all working perfectly. We've got SDR console sharing the antenna and through Omnirig synced up with the radio so we can have click and pounce. That's great. And it all looked so easy, didn't it, when I did that? Except when I came to set it up the first time, it turned out it wasn't that easy because I made a fatal mistake. I already had an IC-7300 Mark I. I've loaded the USB drivers for that into my computer, so I thought, well, that's fine. And I got Omnirig set up on that one. I thought it would be fine, so I'll just plug it all in and it will just work. Wrong. That's because with the USB-C on the Mark II, we've got two virtual COM ports and it needs a completely different driver to make it all work. So let's start with Omnirig first of all. So I can pull up through SDR console, I can get to our Omnirig settings. And once you've downloaded Omnirig, and you can see on the screen there the URL that you can download it from, you have to just choose the IC-7300 in the drop-down menu. It doesn't mention the IC-7300 Mark II yet, but you can put all your other settings in as there. It will work with the IC-7300 settings, except for one thing that's going to be different on the radio, which we'll come to in a moment. However, when I came to choosing the COM port, that's going to be different because, as we've explained, with the USB-C, we've got two virtual COM ports. So that's going to be different. And something else that's different and really foxed me in the beginning is that the default CIV address for the Mark I and the Mark II are different. On the Mark I, it's 94H. On the Mark II, it's B6H. And the first problem I encountered is the Omnirig, and I think you'll find this is the same with some of your FT8 and other digital programs, the older ones that do work with the 7300 Mark I, is they're expecting that old CIV address, 94H. So that means that in order to make the Mark II work with them, you're going to have to change the CIV address from the default. Easy to do though. Just go to the menu, to Set, and then to Connectors, to CIV and CIV address. and I've already adjusted it on this one to the old 94H that it's expecting from the Mark 1. You just do that by plussing and minusing. So there we go. 94H, that's what we want. That's that first thing dealt with. So that's sorted out the CIV address issue. The other thing we've got to do, which is really important, or it's not going to work at all, is download a completely different USB driver. Because I thought it's going to be fine. You know, I've got the drivers for the IC-7300. I'll just fire it all up and it will work. But it didn't, because you've got this USB-C port, which means that you have two virtual COM ports, and so we have to download the specific driver. Now, on your screen at the moment is the address that you'll find that at, and this is what the page looks like from Icom Japan, and it's a USB driver for a number of the radios, including the IC-705 and the 905, and so now you need that same driver for the 7300 Mark II. So get that downloaded, and then you will be able to check in your device manager that you can see the two COM ports. Once we've installed the USB drivers, a quick check in device manager to make sure that we can see them. And if we click on the COM ports there, we can see we've got serial port A, which is on COM 4, and serial port B, which is on COM 3. So there's our two virtual ports. So now we know it's all working. Whatever we're doing is we do have to set up the correct CIV settings. And these again are different in the Mark II, and that's because the CIV menu is different. So let me just show you differently to the Mark I. We've only got 3 speeds on offer, and then auto. There's a bigger menu on the Mark I, but this is easier because I just selected auto, and in theory it will auto match whatever you're connecting it to. And you might remember as well that on the 7300 Mark I, if you've used that with external FT8 software, you have to click a thing called unlink to remote, which is in the menu. That doesn't appear in this Mark II menu, and you don't need to worry about that. So these are the rest of the settings you need. So we've got the CIV address, 94H, we've already done that. You'd have CIV transceive set to off. The options are just on and off. Then the USB LAN remote transceive address, leave at the default, which is 00. The CIV output for antenna, well, that's nothing to do with what we're doing here, but the CIV USB-A echo back, we want that on. There we are then. That's all of our settings so that it's going to work now with Omnirig. But really importantly, don't forget to update that USB driver, because that's really important. Continuing our look at the new IC-7300 Mark II and the differences between it and the Mark I. I've changed bands now. I've come up to 18 megs to look at some CW, because you might remember in the IC-7300 Mark I there's a built-in RTTY decoder. So you simply go into your mode here and select RTTY, and then when you go into the menu, RTTY decode had appeared in the menu, and you could tap on that and there it was, all ready to go. So what's different? What have they added now? Well, now we've got a CW decoder as well. So in your initial Mark I menu, if you went into settings, you had a button that you could push that would give you the CW keying options, but there was no decode option. But now look, if we change the mode and we go to CW, and we go back into our menu, we now have keyer and decode. We can set all our keyer settings if we want to, for all your built-in electronic keyer and everything else. But what we're going to do, of the two, we're going to select CW decode, and then the decode box appears here, a little tuning guide over here. So when I started looking at this a minute ago, there was loads of CW on 18 megs. It seems to have gone, so I'm going to do a quick band change. And we've mentioned before that we've got 2 virtual COM ports. We've talked a lot about COM port A. What does COM port B do? Well, you can use that to do your external keying. So you can actually key from the PC. You can send the signal via the other COM port to the radio, and the radio will be keyed by the computer in CW. And the same also in RTTY and in proper FSK. So you can do proper frequency shift keying from the computer driving through the COM ports to the radio. So it's a really versatile radio, isn't it? It does so many different things. Oh, and we must just mention the inbuilt antenna tuner. I know that it's no different in the Mark II to the Mark I, but one useful tip, and I don't know if you realise this, the sort of range of, and we call them antenna tuners. I know there's a lot of people who go, it's not a tuner, it's a matcher, because all it's really doing is not tuning the antenna. It's just making sure that the radio sees the impedance that it wants to see, 50 ohms, and therefore gets as much oomph out of the radio into the antenna as possible. Now, the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 have the same antenna tuner, which will only tune a limited range of impedances. So you might find mine tunes up my G5RV very happily, actually, on all bands. But that can vary because different feeder lengths, different configurations, different ways of hanging it up. It might not tune on all bands, or you might have another antenna that doesn't tune on all bands. Well, a handy little tip, particularly if you're out operating portable or doing a field day or something like that, and you can't get the antenna to tune, if you go into settings and step down to where we get to others, click on that, there's a setting called emergency. And if you hit emergency, you can tick tuner, and it will now match a wider ratio of impedances, but only at half power. So having selected that, then hit that and it restarts the radio. So now, sometimes I have found that I can retune an antenna, I can get it to work where it wouldn't tune in the ordinary setting, but the only thing is we're now operating on half power. And easy to reverse, you just do the same thing, back into settings, others, emergency, untick tuner, and restart to set. One thing that people often ask about is, why is it that when we go into the bands, it doesn't offer us 60 meters? And you won't see it there in the actual preset bands. You have to do it by frequency input. So you can put the frequency in yourself with obvious careful noting of the band plan so that you know where you're going, and then you can just put those in the memories. So that's what I did here. So I've got one of my 60 meter frequencies in the memory, so you can put your most used ones into the memories. Same number of memories on this as on the Mark 1. There's 101 memories in there, including the band edges, so you won't find it in the band select menu, but it's easy to sort out, and it works very well on 60 meters as well. And interestingly, I couldn't get my G5RV to tune up on the normal ATU on 60 meters, but on that emergency mode, it tunes up fine. I've moved computers now, and I'm sitting at a different place in my shack just to show you how the remote works, because I said to you quite bravely, oh, it's so much easier to set up the remote access to it now that you've got an Ethernet connector and the radio's plugged straight into the router. So let's just test out how easy that is. The first thing you have to do on the radio is set the server up on the radio, because the server now lives in there instead of your external computer. So you go into the network settings and you find the IP address. That's really easy to do. It will show that in the radio that you've been allocated by your router. And then you set the server up by giving yourself a name for that server and also creating a password. So on the screen here, I've got the Icom remote utility, and in that we're going to sort out our settings. So I've just called it the same as the IP address actually here as the server description. So that's the IP address the radio has got. That's the control port 50001. If you're going to access it from outside your own network, you're going to need to make sure your router forwards that, and also 50002 and 50003, and you'd need to know your external IP address, but we're doing it all here on our own network. I called the server remote, that's the name I put in for the user ID on the computer, and I gave it a password. So there we go, and if we click connect, boom, there we go, it's connected. And then you go to the radio list and it can see the IC-7300 Mark II. It's there. I've not connected to it yet because there are some settings that you can do there. You just choose the input and output on this computer that's going to send audio and receive audio, so how that's working on your sound card here. And also you choose a virtual COM port. It's a virtual COM port, pick a number. So I've picked 1. And then, in theory, if I go like that, connect, we can hear audio from the radio. And if I go down here and switch on the actual remote control software, that should boot up. And there we are on CW. And we now have control of our radio. And if we hit scope, we've also got the scope on our remote. Worked first time. There she is, the new IC-7300 Mark II. Evolution, not revolution, some really useful additional features, and I also hope that this video has given you a couple of tips that will help you in setting up, particularly with regard to that USB driver change and also the CIV settings. And I would advise that you go to the Icom UK website and download both the basic and the advanced manual, which you'll find very helpful, and will also help you have a look if you're thinking about getting one of these marvellous radios, to give you an idea of what it can do and how you drive it.